welcome back to Xyrist Codes. Today I want to kind of talk about some of the main things that we see in the people who have applied for positions with my company and failed. Mostly in regards to our test, because the way that we handle things, when people apply after the interview process, we give them a test, and in that test there are certain skills that we are looking for and certain requirements that we have. Um, and a lot of times, those people that do return a test, um, they don't meet a lot of the requirements. So I wanted to talk more about those because personally, I feel like while you can Google the terminology, knowing what the terminology is in general is where people mess up. So they don't know to Google for certain terms because they don't see the terms as anything specific or anything impactful. And it is quite impactful. So let me pull up Notepad. I'm going to take a note from, or a thing from Devin Nash, one of my favorite people to follow. I'm going to use the Notepad. So some of the key terms that we use in our various different versions of tests that we have created. Bring this down a little bit. I didn't realize it was under my camera. Is Restful API. Because specifically in our company, we use a lot of RESTful API stuff, and it seems like a lot of the people that turn in the test don't even design an API at all, let alone a RESTful API. And in my experience, like my personal experience, I didn't really know what a RESTful API was until I was actually at the company doing stuff. I had just happened to design my test in a RESTful API when I applied. So that was a little bit of learning. And so a lot of my experience with that is around what we do at my job. But that being said, I do have a little bit of knowledge on how to set one of those up. And so that's one of the things I would like to talk about in this video. But before I do that, one of the things I need to talk about is called N-tier architecture. Because part of having RESTful API is a result of the architecture of the program, or in this case, set of programs that you're using. So I will start with N-tier architecture and then kind of go into what RESTful API is. And go from there. To do some RESTful API, I'm going to be using a database source. In this case, I would like to use, I'm still debating between a Star Wars API or a Pokemon API. Either of those would work just fine. They have a lot of the pieces that I would need to use as a database source, which I'll get more into when I talk about the N-tier architecture stuff. We'll decide on that when I get closer to the end of the video, or if anybody drops in and kind of makes a decision there, I will go that way. I am streaming this as well as recording, so it will be up on YouTube afterwards. As usual, if you like the video or if you find it helpful, please like, drop a comment, follow, subscribe, all of those things. I know that it sounds annoying when everybody says that, but in my experience, a lot of people forget to do that when they find somebody they like. So just a quick reminder, hopefully that helps. Also, as I mentioned, my Discord will be in the comments below or in the description below, so you can find my coding related Discord there. Okay, so let's start off with N-tier architecture, because that's kind of the overlaying piece that leads into what a RESTful API is, and the largest portion of where people struggle with the tasks that we ask in our test. So N-tier architecture just is a concept that the different pieces of the program are broken apart into different projects, I guess is the best word for it. So you'll have a front end piece, which is in this model, it calls it a presentation tier. The front end piece is what people interact with. This is like when you go to a website. Let's say, for example, one of my favorite websites is League of Legends. LeagueofLegends.com, because I'm dumb. So this is the front end. This is the piece you interact with, and there's not actually a whole lot of logic here. There's not a whole lot that happens logically. What does happen is like this, like the link, the border, the linkable, clickable section that has a little bit of code behind it. But what it does is usually it tells it, hey, I want information from, I want information on what to do when somebody clicks this, and that will go to a middleware piece. So going back to my model here, that would be your logic tier. Now, your logic tier is mainly responsible for handling all forms of logic that you need to cover the task. So in this example, when you click, like, say for this example, or for this link, if you were to click that, your front end piece would ask your middleware, what information do I need to load the next page? And it would grab all that information, or in this case, that's a link to a website. Let's go here. So like you want to get all the game updates. Okay. So your front end piece asks your middleware to get a list of updates and what their titles are and their links and their pictures. And it puts that together in a nice little package and sends it back to the front end piece. Now your middleware piece is responsible for handling all the logic that goes into constructing this. Okay. So that's why it's called the logic tiers. That's where all of your logic is built. And then, that's passed out to the front, the presentation piece, or the front end piece, or the web page in most cases. And the web page just takes that information and displays it. It doesn't really do anything with the information. It just displays it. And like if there's a link embedded or whatever, it'll just say when you click on this displayed piece, run this link, and the link will go back to the logic tier, and the logic tier says what to render for that next bit. Now the data tier is where things get a little more confusing, because this is pretty much like a one-to-one request. So you make a request, it processes stuff and gets an answer. Now this to the data tier, that's not really so much one-to-one. Your databases, or your data storage, or your source of truth, or whatever it's called in your particular example, could be multiple pieces. And what we're going to be doing, or what I'm going to be doing, I should say, the data is all in one place because I'm going to be using a web API. So the data is all going to be in one place, but you could legitimately, and we do at work, have that data in multiple different locations. So, you could be pulling from database A, which has your customer data, but you need to get database B, which has service information based on the customer, but you also need to get into database C, which has plans for the services based on those services. So like you pull some data from A and some data from B and some data from C, and then you match them up and build this model of data that you're going to pass back. And those could each be different adapters that run that database piece. Now usually the middleware does not query the database itself. So like your middleware piece, the logic doesn't actually ask the database anything. Usually you have a database or a data acquisition piece, which I refer to as an adapter because again, in the atmosphere that I work, we refer to them as adapters. And each adapter is usually responsible for one data source. So if you have 3 databases that you need to hit, usually you have 3 different adapters that you need to hit. And those could all be API calls as well. At least in my setup, that's how we do that. So your middleware piece could be asking multiple different adapters for all this data, and then that's again why this is called the logic tier, is because it gets all that data, processes it, and puts it back together into a packet that it wants to send back to your front end to be displayed. Okay, so like if I were to go here in the patch 11.8 notes, all of these could be from different places. All this data could be from different places. Like this could be, and I'm guessing because I don't know how League, in this particular example, I don't know how they store their data, but like they could have the information on a champion stored in one database, the adjustments stored in another database, and the, like for example, I gotta go to the bottom because, okay, so the runes or items are stored in another place with the changes stored in another place. Runes separate. I mean, you could be hitting 9-10 different adapters here, but the middleware piece, normally what we call so drawing a blank right now. Oh god, what is it called? The manager. There we go. Usually the manager is what handles all that logic and puts it all together and says this is going to be your patch notes, which then sends to the front end, and the front end gets all the website, gets all the data for the patch notes, and goes, okay, this is how I'm going to render it. And then you have your display logic, which is like, okay, each champion I'm going to give their name, their basic description of what changed, the context of why it changed, and then the actual numbers. And it does that for each champion. That's what your front end piece does, is just display it for each champion, or for each rune, or for each item, or bug fixes, or any of those things. That's what is likely happening in this particular example. And like I said, I'm just using their website because I'm familiar with their website, but that could be the case for any website. So that's where the end tier development is, going back to this. So like presentation tier being your website or whatever the people interact with. It could be a mobile app. It could be just anything that the users interact with. It's what the users use, and that just passes, like I said, it passes requests down to your logic piece, which is a separate program or project that processes information. So it takes the request and says, well, what do we need to do to complete this request? And it gets all the data for that by passing that down to the adapters, individually. And it could ask things like, what champion changed? Okay, now this database on that champion, what changed for that champion? Okay, on this database, what are the actual numbers, or however they have it set up. And then that data comes back up, and the logic tier says, well, okay, this is all the information. How do I put that together in the way that we want to pass it up for display? Once it's got it all, it passes it back up for display, and the displayer, the presentation piece, displays that. I have another model here. This is less descriptive, or less clean, I guess. It's more simple. But it's the same thing. You got your presentation tier, which is, again, your web page or your mobile device or whatever is interacting with it. Passes those requests down to your logic tier, and then those get processed from your data tier and passed back up, and then back to your presentation. Okay, so that's the first part I wanted to cover, because that's what's going to lead into the next piece that I'm going to talk about, which is the API setup. Okay, so a Restful API is a specific API design. So I'm just going to pull up Swappy. This Star Wars API. I'm just going to pull it up here so that way you can see what's going on. So an API, usually you call to a website, and this is a RESTful API. The website is set up as a RESTful API. and you tell it what you're searching for. So in this example, I'm looking for people, and which person I'm looking for is ID number 1, and that's hosted at this swappy.dev/API. Okay, and that person number 1 would be, in this case, Luke Skywalker. That's what their ID is in their database, and then it has details on that person. Okay, so what this is going to do is this is serving as our data piece. So this is a piece of software that queries the database directly and gives you a response. And this is typically how the data pieces, or what we call the backend or the adapters, this is usually what it does, is it gets you data and it passes it back up, and it doesn't care which pieces you want or don't want. Okay, so in this example, you're querying a person, you want person number 1, it's going to get you their name, height, mass, hair color, skin color, eye color, birth year, all of these things, but you might only want their name. Like, I just want to know who is in slot number 1. I just want the name. Well, that's where your middleware piece or your manager would actually filter this data out and just be like, well, okay, we have all this data, but I only want this piece, and then it'll dump the rest of it off. Or if you're looking for, like, well, what vehicles did he ever drive? It'll take that data, and your manager might then have to make this call to get what those vehicles are. Right, and that's where your manager, like I said, might make multiple calls. So you're asking about Luke Skywalker. You want to know what vehicles he's drove. You get this data back from the data piece or the adapter, and then you're like, okay, well, I need to know what those are. So you send that back, and you get more data. So for example, I could actually take this. Just want this much, and then so we're going to query that instead. I won't. Oh. There we go. So we're just going to query that instead and be like, okay, well, that is a snow speeder. That vehicle that he drove is a snow speeder, and it's got all the data on that. Okay, and so that's what your manager, like I said, that's what your manager does. It makes another call to get more information if that's the information you want to get, and it compiles all that to display to the front end. All right. As I said, this would serve the same purpose as the data piece of a project, or the data piece of an end-tier design. And we're going to use it for that purpose in what we're doing. What I want to do is focus on creating a middleware piece, because specifically with our tests, that's what we're looking for, because it's super easy to create a front end, and it's super easy to actually use this to create a front end. And use this as your middleware and adapter piece if that's what you wanted to do, but that doesn't serve the purpose of what we're looking for, what a lot of companies would be looking for when they're interviewing an individual. Now, that being said, the middleware piece that we're going to design, we want it to be able to be interfaced with a front-end piece. So I want to design it as a Restful API as well. So that will be the goal there. And when we get to that point, I want to show you how you would integrate that with a front-end piece. It'll essentially be a similar conversation at that point, though. As I said, we have the option of using this one or the Pokemon one. I personally would prefer to use the Pokemon one, because I've done interfacing with this a bunch of times. So I'm going to actually pull up the PokeApi instead, because that one's newer to me, and so I don't have as much experience with it, and I can kind of show you how I would go through that kind of situation. Okay, so interfacing with this. Typically on these APIs, there is a documentation page. So you want to go to that documentation page. That's where you're going to get most of your data. Yeah. I want. Okay. Okay. Yeah, this is the documentation, and it'll show you how you're going to interface with this API. Okay. So I'm going to move that off to the side. I'm going to start a new project. Wrong one. Let's start a new project here. If you don't have Visual Studio, that's fine. You can use whatever. I use Visual Studio because that's what I use at work. I would recommend it. It's my preference. If you don't have any if you don't have any knowledge on how to use Visual Studio, I can walk you through that. Again, my Discord is in the will be in the comments or the description below. I can kind of help you set it up. It's super easy to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. And again, I want to do a Restful API project. I program in C#. So what I'm going to do is look for API. We want to look for an API. Okay, console API project. So this is doing this almost always sets it up almost perfectly for using as a RESTful API HTTP service. So this is what I'm going to use: C#, ASP.NET. That's the setup I'm going to use. We want to name this PokeApi. API. We'll just call it manager. So I'm going to use a naming scheme that I use at work. Manager dot PokeApi. I'm going to click, make sure I have it in the location that I want it to be, because yeah, I don't think that's where I want it to exist. We'll do it in Cyrus codes. There we go. We'll select it. We'll set it here. We want to, one of the big things that people always get docked on is they're not using the most current framework, which right now, as of late September, middle September 21, is 5.0, .NET 5.0. We don't want to use any authentication types right now. Configure for HTTPS. I don't use Docker. We're not using any of that stuff. So we're just going to go ahead and create this project. Okay. Now it's pre-created a couple of things. Namely, it's created a controller, this weather forecast service, which we will be getting rid of. It's created a program CS for us, which has the basic setup. It tells it to use the startup. Our startup is going to have a couple of pieces. It looks like it already implements a Swagger doc. So if we boot this up, we should be able to actually go to the Swagger for this weather forecast setup. So you'll see, yeah, it's already got the Swagger setup going. So it takes you to the address that you're running at, which in this case is localhost, and then the port number, and then Swagger, which takes you to this weather forecast where you can interface with the API that you're building. This is what RESTful API is. The ability to call it via web address. So I could actually go localhost 44366 weather forecast. It actually tells you right here what that is. So I could actually copy that. Not hitting my Swagger front end, it gives me the data. This is raw data that is pulled from that API call, which should match this right here. Raw data from the API call. Swagger just cleans it up. So the first section from bracket to bracket is the date of tomorrow, it looks like. 3 degrees, 3 degrees centigrade, 37 Fahrenheit, and hot. So if you go here, first bracket to the end, it's the same thing. Tomorrow's date, temperature is different, it looks like. They're ordered differently. Oh, I called it later, so it'd be different. But there's your 3 and 37 temperature. Okay. There's that. Cool. As it stands right now, we're 25 minutes into the first video. I'm getting ready to start into API design. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to break the video in two and use the bathroom and all that stuff. And when I start back up, I will get into the actual coding side of it, where I talk about more of what the RESTful API pieces are. Like I said, this setup pretty much gets you going for all the pieces you would need, especially in our industry, which is where a lot of people fail right off the bat. They don't get this this RESTful API setup going at all. So anyway, like I said, I'm going to stop the recording here, and then I'll kick it up here in a little bit.